Welcome to the F3Knoxville family of podcasts. Hello and welcome to the spring break edition of Beyond the COT, an F3Knoxville podcast. As you noticed, there was no Monday or Wednesday podcast this week, so no normal Beyond the COT, no picking up the 6 on Wednesday, and there will be no normal Mumblechatter tomorrow on Friday. I am spending this week, like I mentioned last week, not on some wonderful vacation and relaxing and whatever. I have been spent this week doing a little working at school and doing a little home improvement stuff and queuing as much as I can. I got Monday, got Tuesday, had a little migraine yesterday morning at Shamrock, but those boys really picked up the slack for me, letting them know I couldn't see out of one eye yesterday morning at about 5:05, and I probably wasn't going to make the beat down. So thank you to Mermaid and those guys over at Shamrock for helping me out. Queued this morning at Dog Pound for a nice St. Patty's Day. However, I know being spring break, we were a little light, so it was Ribbed and I, and we did our normal ruck around the Dog Pound, making sure that there were no snakes, like St. Patrick casting the snakes out of Dog Pound. Good thing we didn't see any. We did see a couple skunks. It is getting warmer that time of year. So headed over to a 2.0 workout in the morning at the Equalizer. It's at normal 5:30 time. But I'm spending some time this week also working on the podcast and trying to make it better. So one of the things I'm trying to do is to get a little bit more intentional with the intros and the outros. Been told that my music was a little folksy and needs to be more upbeat, and I'm working on that as well. If there's anybody who has any suggestions, has any tips or tricks with this, I am using Anchor, no free ads, but Anchor, to put out this podcast. So it's a little limited in some of its music and some of its editing capabilities. So I'm searching out for other, working on some other different apps and software to edit and overlay music and stuff for the intros and for the outros and for transitions and stuff like that. So I am using part of this week for that as well. But for today, you're going to get something a little bit more special. I am going to actually be re-releasing, along with this here as the intro, re-releasing one of the first, I think probably the first F3Knoxville podcast I listened to kind of get me going on this whole podcast journey, and that is when Steam interviewed Crawdad. I've worked out with Crawdad many times at the Asylum on Saturday mornings. He is an interesting guy. I love him to death. He has had an interesting life and career, and I loved listening to hear more about that through this interview with Steam. If you haven't checked out, he's got a couple books out. I've gotten The Other Virus on Amazon, and I've read through that. I keep forgetting to throw it in the van to get him to sign it on a Saturday morning. Hopefully I can see if he'll be there this week and get him to sign it, so I have a nice little limited edition signed Crawdad copy of The Other Virus. Right now, for the life of me, I can't remember the title of his other book. I do know that in that book there is a character, and he alludes to it in this interview with Steam, who is an F3 guy in his book. I think that is the coolest thing ever to get that connection. So here it is. There'll be a little bit of me here at the end with a little outro after this interview with Crawdad that Steam did back in, I believe, 2020.
Good morning, Robbie Dickens.
Good morning, sir. Fantastic. Thank you for having me. Excited
You're
to chat
welcome.
today.
I am glad that you could be here, brother. I'm excited. We have a lot of good stuff to dive into today. I know we're going to dive into a little bit of your background and history and your professional experience here, and also your book that just came out, The Missionary. I'm a couple chapters in now and love it, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts and heart on that. And then we'll also talk about a little bit of your F3 experience and kind of what you have seen in F3 so far, and maybe how that's benefited you and your life and family as well. So
I love it.
I'm
Hey,
pumped.
what a great way to spend an hour, right? We're going to talk about my book and my F3 experience. I'm fired up, excited. Appreciate you having me. Honored to be on the F3 podcast, and especially going out to such a great group of guys and hopefully gals as well. So, man, let's dive in. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So let's start with you. So kind of fill in our audience and tell us a little bit about your professional experience and kind of how you got to this point leading up to your book here.
Absolutely. So I go by Robbie Dickens. My author name is Robertson. That's my real name. And so I was born and raised in the great state of Louisiana, sportsman's paradise. And I lived in Monroe, West Monroe for the first 15 years, the home of Duck Dynasty, Willie Robertson, those guys, great guys. And then we moved to Shreveport, Bossier City area, which is the home of Barksdale Air Force Base and the home of the 8th Air Force. And so born and raised in Louisiana, and went to undergraduate at a work-study institution, College of the Ozarks, also called Hard Work U, in Branson, Missouri. It's actually just across the river from Branson, Missouri. And so I was there in undergraduate, and my junior year, or the summer after my junior year, I was fortunate enough to get an internship in the White House. And so I interned in the White House Office of Political Affairs under a gentleman named Ken Melman. He was the deputy assistant to the president at the time. The president was George W. Bush. It was 2001, the summer of 2001. And honestly, it was a fantastic time to be in the White House. And so any references to the White House and the Eisenhower Executive Office Building and the secret library and things like that are actually things that I've been to and seen in person. And so just some fantastic experiences. And so being in the White House, my older brother, Reed Dickens, was also the assistant press secretary, and he had an office in the West Wing. And so I was really lucky and blessed enough to mooch off his coattails. And so I actually lived with him, and he helped me get the internship. And so then it was just up to me to work my tail off. And so extremely grateful. So anybody ever tells you they've worked or interned at the White House, they didn't just get in the door because they sent a resume and then they were just these especially charming characters. They knew someone. And so I did as well. And so interned there my summer after my junior year, and went back to undergraduate to finish. And actually I had to get internship credit. I had to write an essay on my time in the White House. And the day I had to go turn it in to my professor, I'll never forget this, was a beautiful, crisp September morning in 2001, September 11th, 2001. And I got a phone call from my mom, said, "Hey, your brother just called, said we probably won't hear from him for a few days, but turn on the television. We've been attacked." And, this is funny / ironic now, but I didn't have a cell phone. I was 21 or 22 years old. I didn't have a cell phone. And so we turned on the radio, I think, first, and then found this old school clunky TV in the office. I worked for the dean of the college at the time. And so we turned on the television and watched the towers fall. And so that really helped chart the course for the rest of my life. And so I remember standing in my dorm room that day, and just my roommate and I, it's like we couldn't comprehend what we were seeing, along with the rest of the country. Yeah. And so, so my brother lived across the street from the Pentagon on the 19th floor of these condos, and his condo overlooked, across the interstate, the Pentagon. And so that overlooks where obviously all the carnage was. And so it shook me to the core. And so I finished undergraduate in December of 2001. and then went back to DC in April of 2002 and started my first job in DC as a political appointee. It's called a Schedule C appointee for George W. Bush at the time in 2002. And that was kind of phase 2, if you will. Are we good? You want me to keep trucking through this?
Yeah, man. That I had no idea. I think that's really awesome, and even that you remember in detail that much about where you were on 9/11. I think so. So I'm 26 and still remember where I was. I was with my family and vividly remember that. But for people that lived through that and can vividly reimagine exactly where they were, that is really powerful. And so previous to 9/11, you already had that political experience per se, and it kind of ran in your family a little bit with your brother as well. So did anything change, I guess, in your mindset of why you went back to Washington after 9/11, or I guess what shifted for you after that and after graduating college as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I already knew I wanted to be back in DC, and I thought maybe work for the Secret Service, maybe work for the Department of Defense. I really couldn't put my finger on it. And then it wasn't like I woke up on September 12th with this, level of clarity and that I could articulate exactly what I wanted. I just knew I wanted to be back there. It was like you had this drawing feeling like I have to be there. And obviously it was the sense of nationalism and the pride that we felt, but it was also just, that was across the street from where I lived. And so in 2002, I really wanted to work for the Secretary of Defense. And so, long story short, I got a job offer to work in the United States Department of Education, which I'll be frank with you, I was not thrilled about. But at the time, it's the only offer I had. And I thought, you know what, I got to take it. So I accepted the offer. And I'm not kidding you, the day I was packing up to leave for DC, I get a phone call. And it's from OSD, Office of the Secretary of Defense. And they want me to come in and interview to work for them. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Wow. And so, this was how I was raised. I had given the Department of Education my word that I was starting there. And so I turned OSD down. I mean, not that it was an offer, it was an interview, but I turned that down and said, no, I've already committed to a position at education, and that's what I'm going to go do. And so I'm so glad I did, because once I got there, my third day there, literally on the job. So I get to the Department of Education, my first day I report for duty, and the guy who had interviewed me, and I was going to be on this traveling team, if you will, I sit down with him on day one, and he says, hey, listen, kind of a bummer, but the job we hired you for, it really doesn't exist anymore. So, okay, all right, that's not ideal. He said, but we'll figure something out. So on day 3, the Secretary of Education at the time, whose name was Rod Page, he was the first African-American Secretary of Education in the United States history. His personal aide, his special assistant, I saw him in the hallway, and I had met him one time at a Bible study in DC. I didn't know him well, but I knew who he was. And so his name was Eric Walker. And so he hits me up in the hallway. He goes, hey, listen, he pulls me off to the side. Do you have any interest in being the Secretary's special assistant personal aide? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. And he said, well, I'm on my way out. I've been looking for the replacement. So long story short, I start traveling with the Secretary, who was a cabinet member. And I went from undergraduate to being at home for 2 months, coaching my little brother's baseball teams, to being in DC with no job, to 3 days later, I get this lead. And so I start, over the course of 2 or 3 months, I start traveling with the U.S. Secretary of Education. Wow. And so at that point, it got to be a bit surreal. Listen, in DC, there's this power spectrum, right? There are people that think they're powerful because they have access to power, and then there are people that are actually powerful. I was actually on the former end. I just had access to powerful people. I was a nobody, but I was a special assistant, and so I got my top secret clearance, and I began to travel with him as part of his duties of being a cabinet member. obviously they're called constitutional officers.
Mm-hmm.
They have some constitutional duties that are classified, and I started participating in those. And, the United States is an interesting place with our classification systems. There's things you can watch on TV and Google, but
Mm-hmm.
they remain classified. So if you're a Kiefer Sutherland fan and you have Netflix, you could get a pretty good sense of what those duties were. So I started traveling, participating with the secretary, and in the course of that, meeting some interesting people. And so that, to be honest with you, this is a long way to answer your question. That is when I had the clarity that I want to be involved in this dark, secret world of national security. That was when I had the most clarity. And so at this point, I'm 23, 24. And so I have the clarity, but I don't know what to do about it, frankly. And so in August of 2003, Caitlin and I got married. And the secretary called me in and said, hey, basically, we've got to get you a real job. You can't be traveling. Because we would travel sometimes 15, 20 days a month and work, 100-hour weeks. And it was a blast, but you make no money and you work a ton, and it's not a great married life. And so I transferred into being a liaison to the House and Senate for the Department of Education. And so during that time, I'm in this weird zone because I still have a top secret clearance, but I'm in very much of a day job. And so a turning point for me was I went to a classified job fair. So you had to have a top secret clearance to get in the job fair, which is kind of a cool little vibe. And so you show your street creds, if you will, you get in, and then it's just a job fair, right? And you walk around, but every booth, the jobs they're hiring for, classified. And so I get a lead there, and I'm pretty excited. And so I go home, I tell Caitlin, hey, listen, they're looking to hire somebody. I think it was in Hamburg, Germany. I think it was Hamburg. Somewhere in Germany. And so I'm fired up. We're newlyweds. At the time, I think we may have had, so we got pregnant pretty soon after we got married. So we may have had Carter at the time, also known as Jumbo and F3. And so I interview on the phone, and they said, man, we really like you. We like your clearance, but you don't really have any credentials in the international world. You don't have a master's degree. And so they rejected me for the position. And so that day I went home and I told Caitlin, hey, I know I said I'd never go back and get a master's degree, but if I'm going to pursue this, I need some credentials. And so based on that, I went back to Texas A&M to the George Bush School of Government and Public Service and studied with some of the finest human beings I've ever gotten to know. Many of them work across the globe in official, non-official capacities and just different jobs, both secretive and non-secretive, just a great group of people. And so leaving there, I had my master's degree in international affairs with an emphasis in national security. And being there was just like a intellectual, cerebral, national cornucopia, right? Every day you're studying with people who are going to fight behind enemy lines, either metaphorically or literally. And then also you really get your passion. And so after I left there, I went to DC and worked in Homeland Security for 3.5 years. And so I'll just touch on a few things there, and then I'll take a breath and let you kind of push back.
Yeah, please do.
When I was in Homeland Security, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has basically had a think tank at the time. It was a nonprofit, but it was a DHS.gov, if you will, type of organization. It's called the Homeland Security Institute. And so I was an analyst there. And I did everything from the super exciting to the mundane. So I worked on counterterrorism issues. I worked on domestic threat assessments. I worked on Border Patrol issues, Coast Guard issues, all the way down to bureaucratic things. And so being there before I moved to Knoxville really was fantastic because I got a chance to get published there in counterterrorism issues. I got a chance to really immerse myself into a lot of the details. So I would say professionally, those were the building blocks, if you will, of what's underneath the missionary, so to speak. 10 years on and off in DC. And then obviously we've been in Knoxville for 9 years. And so I worked at TVA for 9 years. And so did a lot of writing there in a business capacity. So that's really the professional background, if you will, that's underneath both my writing, but as well as just me as a person. And so my wife's name is Caitlin. We've been married 17 years.
Awesome.
We have 4 kids. Carter, 16. He goes by Jumbo at F3. We have Emma, who's 14, Asher, who's 10, and Camille's 8.
Man.
So that's us.
Man, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, for sharing that. Yeah, wow. I had no idea about that extensive part of your history, and especially with counterterrorism and kind of being part of that silent professional in the shadows community, that I would fairly say the general public probably doesn't know a lot of or have exposure to a lot of. But I'm sure you learned a lot of lessons, and there were a lot of takeaways, even when you were moving your family to Knoxville. But as you were going back and getting your master's and kind of having your hands in these communities that are all rooted in public service and counterterrorism, with your wife. So you and Caitlin are married, and Carter's on the way or here as well. Were there any just big takeaways as you were extending your professional portfolio, but you're also trying to start a family as well, and kind of leading up to the Knoxville move? How did that go on both sides of the spectrum?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, DC is a town really designed, if you're married, to have 2 6-figure incomes. If you're not, at least one. And so, as a public servant, as a 25-year-old, even my second tour there, pushing 30, I was not making a lot of money. And so you really have to be bought into the profession of public service, because you're not making a ton of money. You're working your can off. But I have to tell you, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, because if you fast forward to 2020, we live in a world where people that work for the government are portrayed as villains. And that was not my experience. I worked with a lot of fine people who really were dedicated to the United States and its security, and trying to do a good job. And at the end of the day, trying to take the subway or the metro or the bus home and be with their friends, their loved ones, their family, their wife, their kids, their husband, whoever, whatever their state in life was. And so, number one was really you have to be bought into public service, because it is really this kind of greater good, almost syndrome, if you will, in that on occasion, as you're struggling to pay your bills, you have to step back and go, okay, wait, we're here on purpose. We wanted to be here. And so furthermore, if you are picking out a spouse, and in my case, I was in the process of dating and getting engaged and getting married. For me, my fiance and wife had to really be on board with that, because she wasn't marrying a guy that was loaded. And so family dynamics became really important. Communicating about the relationship became very important, because if she was looking for a guy who was going to go work, on Wall Street, or a guy who's going to own a business, not that would never happen, but for that time, it was not going to happen. And so number one was you really have to be bought in on public service. Sure. Number two is I really recommend that people try to find a passion in what they do for a living. Not everybody gets to do it. And there's these overlapping Venn diagrams of life, if you will. And so there's sometimes your circle of your passion and the circle of your vocation actually overlay, which is pretty cool. Sometimes they don't, and you just have to make money and pay your bills. But I at least recommend people try to find their passion. And it could take you 5 or 10 years or 15 years. You don't just, I don't think it just hits you like an apple falling out of a tree one day. But I think if you're not pursuing some level of passion, I think you just go to work every day, right? You punch the clock and you come home. I don't know that that's wrong, but it seems like there would be these long gaps of your career, if you will, or your life, where you just were mailing it in. And to me, that feels so, I can't imagine doing that. Now, I have done it for periods of my life, but as far as, I guess I'm saying, early when you come out of college, you really only come out of college once, right? Hypothetically. And to really propel that, or even if you're coming out of your graduate program, or even if you've gotten an associate's degree and you're getting a mentor, an apprenticeship, whatever the case is, some level of propelling and defining your passion. So I highly recommend people try to look for it, and it doesn't have to be their job, but at least looking for it, because eventually I figured out for me, I was passionate about national security and I was passionate about writing, and they didn't always overlap. So when I wrote, I wasn't doing that for a living. Like, I was working in the national security world, and obviously I was working my tail off. So I wasn't writing per se. I was getting published for the government, but I wasn't writing for fun. And then now I'm writing as a passion, but I'm not working in national security. But there was this underlying theme of, I knew what I loved. And so I highly recommend people, and listen, that could be dentistry, that could be building homes, it could be a ministry, right? It could just be 100 different things, but like, what makes you tick, and how can you find a way to do that? So those are a couple things.
And finding that fulfillment, I think, is what I hear too. You can punch in the clock. I mean, that, the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, that's all good and well. The bills have to be paid, but I think what you're hitting on is when you find that sweet spot of maybe tapping into those gifts that you were born with, and tapping into a little bit of, hey, maybe I'm created to do this, and maybe I'm supposed to do this and find fulfillment in it. I think there is a pretty good sweet spot where you can do both really well, and they might not overlap as well.
That's right. And you may find, hey, I'm passionate about coaching baseball. Okay, well, the Braves are not looking for a new manager, so I can volunteer my time for KYS. Yeah. Okay, I mean, that's a route, right? That's doing something that you love. And so, to me, what's the most regrettable is when I see people just stumbling their way through life. And I know we're going to get to this later, but that's really a sweet spot for F3 as well, right? Like, don't stumble your way through life, right? Don't be a sad clown.
Yes.
And so, so really trying to find your passion and pursue it. I was fortunate enough that I had, I'm so grateful that I accepted the position at the Department of Education and got these experiences, because I was able to interact with some folks that really kind of, lit the fire. And then my time at the Bush School, I could never replace. I mean, my colleagues there, and listen, I don't want to paint the wrong picture. I was not Jason Bourne or anything. I had some fantastic colleagues who actually do that kind of stuff. But I mean, when you get to interact with people who are passionate about similar things, in our case, we were getting master's degrees. It's, the literature calls it flow, right? You feel like you're in your groove, and it. You go every day and you go, this is where I'm supposed to be. And again, doesn't last your whole life, but man, when you find it, you know it.
Oh yeah. Well, and what I hear through you telling your story is the stage is being set for you to go back and get your master's. The stage was being set for you to move your family to Knoxville. The stage was being set for you to find F3 and be a man of impact, to write the missionary and in your other works as well. And I think God has a funny way of doing that, of setting that stage, even before the lights come on,
Absolutely.
Just like you were going to the Department of Education, that probably was not your man, I'm created for this 150%, but the stage was being set, and things were working in the background so that you could meet Caitlin, right? And so that you could move to Knoxville, and I think sometimes we neglect the process versus the end product. And I think you spoke about that very well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a balance between, on one hand, there was a show on when I was a kid on Nickelodeon. I don't remember the name of it, but basically it was like American Ninja Warrior, but back in the 80s. And you went through this obstacle course, and at the very end, if you chose the wrong door, somebody beat you up with a pugil stick. I don't think life is like that, sure. Right? The Lord can bless you any path you're on, but at some level, you look back and you go, man, yeah, the stage was definitely being set, and I'm so grateful for it. I'm so grateful that job working for the Department of the Army in Germany. I'm so grateful they rejected me because that rejection led to better things. And I had rejections for positions that I wanted in the intelligence community that were just a kick in the gut at the time. But I'm so grateful it happened because it led to bigger, I don't want to say bigger and better things. That's not fair, but it led to where I am today, which I'm extremely grateful for.
Yes. Yeah. Which when you think about it was probably the plan all along. And,
absolutely.
And that is a very humbling fact. And, so let's talk about, you're in Knoxville now, your family's in Knoxville. You are working for the TVA. Let's dive into the missionary, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite page turners as I've been reading it this week. And tell me a little bit about that, because I'm excited to continue reading it and finish reading it, and I know you are excited to have it published. And I would just love to hear your heart for that.
Sure, thank you. And if you talk to any author, they're shameless acceptors of compliments about their writing. So, all flattery and nonsense is accepted. So we moved to Knoxville in 2011. Our kids are young. I start working at TVA, which is a fantastic place with a good mission. People have no idea how many things TVA does here in the area. Not only our public, our electric power that's funded by rates, and they don't accept federal funds. We always get beat up for accepting federal funds, which they haven't in 20 or 30 years. Not only do they keep the lights on, which is fantastic, but they take care of the lakes and rivers. And as someone who spends an exceptional amount of time on the water, I'm grateful for that. And so we get here, work at TVA, and I worked my way through my professional career here. And so I was the director. It was called Operational Assurance. It was TVA's internal audit function for 4 years. And so I am either writing, approving, editing, publishing, professional writing, if you will, in the business environment for years. And so if you said, what do you do functionally? I would say, well, I'm an editor, I'm an approver, I teach adults how to write well. And so I'd always kind of written for a living, if you will, but obviously never between the covers of a book. And so in 2019, and just a side note, kind of a motif, if you will, to run through my life. I'm an avid reader, and my library at home is something that I'm extremely proud of. And I never, if my kids want books, I never ask them how much they are. I never give them specific caps or allowances on books. If they want to go to a bookstore and get a book, it's open season, period. And so my dad was a big reader. My father-in-law was a big reader. And so I'm an avid reader. And so there's two things that you would see that I'm actually looking on my desk right now. There are books and there is a journal. And so I've been journaling, and hang in there. There's a point to this, lest you think I'm just off heading to left field. So I've been an avid journaler I started actually, interestingly enough, I cracked open the first page of my first journal on the train to DC from a White House internship. I still have it on a shelf. And so one of my favorite books by David McCullough was John Adams, and John Adams was a big, he did a lot of journaling, as did Thomas Jefferson. And so I was reading that at the time, I believe. And so I started journaling. And so hang in there with me. So I have stacks of journals from the past 20 years.
Wow.
And stacks of books. And so one thing that I don't want to say I've always wanted to do it. I don't want to say this like, hey, since the time I was a kid, I wanted to do this. But I would say for the past decade or two, I've wanted to write a book. And I didn't for 100 different reasons. It's too difficult. It's too long. You can't make money, which, by the way, are all fairly accurate. But in 2019, as I'm sitting down with my journal for the year and I sketch out what are my goals for the year, spiritually, for my family, professionally, I have these 3 categories of goals. And I sketch them out for the year. And I try to get fairly operational so that I can look at them at different points in the year and then look at them on New Year's Eve and go, okay, did I do what I want to do? And so I give credit to John Adams and I give credit to Greg McEwen, who wrote the book Essentialism, who has kept my fire lit about journaling over the decades. And so in 2019, on January 1, as I was looking at the year, I thought, you know what, I'm tired of being the guy that just talks about stuff. I want to write a book this year. I knew I wanted to do it in fiction. And so my goal for the year was to do a first draft of a manuscript for 2019. And so I didn't know what that looked like, didn't know what it meant. And so I actually finished the first draft really in August, September of last year. And it's kind of like when the dog catches the car, what do? I finished the first draft and I was so excited, and I had family members read it, and I was giddy, and I frankly didn't know how to proceed. It's like, okay, what do I do with this? And so I was fortunate enough, Captain Crunch, Ted Anslett, connected me with a very popular New York Times bestselling author. And I don't mention his name because the advice he gave me I don't think would be thought well of by a publisher. But it connected me with this author here in town. And he basically gave me the courage and some insights to self-publish. And so the manuscript for The Missionary sat there idle for a few months. And then I began I got a professional editor this year and began the process of editing, carving it up, feeding it, feedback, et cetera. But I spent last year, 2019, my writing process was every night, Monday through Thursday night, I would get in bed after the kids were in bed, after my wife was asleep. I would get in bed, have my laptop on my bedstand, and I would write 1,000 words a night, Monday through Thursday night. And I did that for 8 months. And at first, you're kind of stumbling your way around. You have no idea what you're doing. But then once I read Stephen King's book, the title is On Writing. That was like my aha moment. And I read the second section, which is how he teaches people to write. I read that 2 or 3 times, just carved it up, marked it up. And so then I realized, you have to get into the story. And so I began to, for that phase in my life, one of, my son Asher was newly exploding onto the autism spectrum, and we didn't know what we were doing. And so at the end of the day, it was such a sweet time to open my laptop, put my headphones on, and have a couple composers that I always listen to, Hans Zimmer and Ramin Djawadi. And I would put my headphones on and disappear into this world. And it was like my own world, and nobody bothered me, and it wasn't stressful. And that's where the characters all came alive to The Missionary. And so it was a blast. And so I knew that I knew I wanted to, I knew I wanted to take this to its finish. And so basically I finished it. I took just a brief detour. So when COVID exploded onto the scene, if you will, to use that metaphor again, I decided it concerned me how much time my kids and their friends were spending on their phones, because they're at home, they're doing their school. At the time, Knox County was kind of, again, we didn't know what we were doing. That's okay. And I hated how much time they spent on their devices. And so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna write some short form content that they can look at and read on their phones. And so I took a detour from The Missionary and wrote The Other Virus and released that in a weekly, bi-weekly manner in these episodes. It's a book now, The Other Virus, a novel. But I took a break from The Missionary to write that. And so then I came back on board with The Missionary probably, in the last, 3 months, if you will, and finished out The Missionary. And so anyway, it's been a blast. All of the reasons that I didn't want to do it were all true. I just needed to. There's a great book called Willpower Doesn't Work, and you have to pardon me. I'm constantly referencing and selling books, but they've just been impactful. And so I just realized I just needed to do it, and so I've released it recently. And so
awesome.
Yeah, I'll take a breath there, and then we can dive into the plot if you want to. Whatever.
Please, yes, I would love that, man. Yeah, wow. I don't think people know how much goes into writing a book. From the creative process to actually filling the pages to publishing, to editing. That is not a short process by any means. Takes a lot of patience, I'm sure, and so what parts of writing the missionary and also the other virus, I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well. What parts of your process were good and were like, man, I'm affirmed in this. I know I'm supposed to be doing this. This is awesome. And what parts were maybe like, man, I'm like, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? And kind of those doubtful thoughts, which we all get, and especially when writing a book, it's like, man, this is a massive endeavor. And tell me a little bit about that process, and also how it affected, I guess, your kids, because I think that's really cool that you wrote this shorter book within writing the missionary of the context of wanting to care for your kids well, right?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Those are excellent questions. So the parts, I was talking to my mother the other day and I said, writing the first draft manuscript of a book is a blast. Like the first draft is, what my editor, Sue Strecker, calls the kitchen sink version, right? You throw it all out there. So my first draft of the missionary was 87,000 words and nothing's off, out of bounds, right? You just throw it all out there. Your creative juices are flowing. It's like, man, this is good stuff. The second step, which I had experience in, but it's still difficult, is the feedback process. So writing is really deleting and editing and carving. And I forget, one author called it killing your darlings, if you will. And so my experience in Homeland Security, because we had professional editors who had no problem using 4-letter words in the editing comments. I mean, I'd get these comments, these track changes, and be like, what the bleep is this? It doesn't bleeping make sense. And you're like, okay, so if I heard you correctly, you don't like that sentence. And so I had that in my background. So I had pretty thick skin. And so when my editor sent me my first draft with comments, she also sent a 20-page cover letter with its deficiencies. And your initial instinct is, what if I just deleted her name and act like I never knew her, right? What if we just went to somebody else that gave us, the answers we want to hear and told us how amazing we were. But I had the experience in the thick skin, and so you just have to lean into it. And so I would say even that part was good. And so it went from 87,000 words, and currently between those pages is about 72,000.
Wow.
And so I deleted about 15,000 words. That's about 75 pages of content that were deleted. And so you do a lot of cutting. And I probably did 7 to 10 revisions of the manuscript. And you go down where you're a word here, a word there, an adverb here, so that part was affirming, because when you're editing and cutting and deleting and you get those prose and you get that paragraph, it feels good. And you're like, oh yeah, that's how I wanted it to sound. So that felt good. Now the tough part, where I really got self-doubt, was when you get into the publishing process. We live in this incredible democratized world of social media where there's experts on everything, right? And so when you say, well, you can self-publish or you get a publisher, right? You got these two, you got this fork in the road. And for me, I decided, well, I could send 20 letters and pitches to publishers and get rejected and invest this energy, or I could spend all that energy on self-publishing, sell a bunch of copies, and then it'd be self-evident. And then if I want to do the publishing route, great. If not, hey, it's making money. So so when you take that fork in the road, you take the self-publishing route, there are 10 million ways to do it. And so the self-doubt comes in when you're constantly going, man, am I doing this right? The answer is typically no.
Sure, but you're learning as you go.
But you're learning, and you're stumbling, and you're stumping your toe, and it's kind of like when you walk through your house at night, and you kick the ottoman in the living room, and it's like, man, how did I not know that was there? But you move on, right? You keep going, and you stumble your way in the kitchen, you get that glass of milk or whatever. So in writing, I would say the self-publishing process on, you have this manuscript in your hands. What in the world do I do with this? And so getting your editor, getting a cover designer, I have a fantastic cover designer, getting my formatter who's fantastic, and then Then there's some really judgmental decisions where you go, so for example, typos. In most big box publisher books right now at Barnes & Noble, I would say you'll find 1 to 2 typos per manuscript that's on the shelf. So I'm going, okay, how many times is enough?
Yeah.
Right. When is it ready to go to print? Because when you self-publish, you got a little bit more insecurity, right? So you're going, when is it enough? And at some point, it was just like, you know what? I've got to lean into this and fail fast. And so anytime someone has sent me something, which frankly and fortunately has not been much, I go, thanks for the feedback. I'll pull the manuscript down, change it, move on. And so you're always looking at an updated manuscript, which is the cool thing about Kindle publishing through Amazon. Now, you asked the question, how does this affect my family? So when you announce to your family or close friends that you're writing a book, it's terrifying because they're like, this is great. And they start asking you all these questions. And then you kind of shrink back and go, what have I done? Like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And so I would say the thing that was the coolest part is, I remember telling Carter, Jumbo, that I was writing a book. And he immediately started asking me questions as if it was evident that it would be successful. Like, his questions weren't about, well, do you think you can really do this? His first questions were, oh, is it going to be a hardback or a paperback? Oh, well, is it going to sell in Barnes? And he started asking me all these questions as if it was going to be successful, which was intoxicating because I was like, oh my gosh, they believe in me. And I had one night where I was really struggling with one of my characters, and I go get in bed with Asher. I'm tucking him in. He's 8 at the time. And he asked me a question about one of my characters. He goes, well, have you ever thought about so-and-so? I mean, maybe he's just, and I mean, it blew me away. And I had to run back and make notes in my note sketch to go, oh my gosh, how did I not think of that? So the kids have been incredible. My wife, Caitlin, has literally been my #1 fan throughout. She never doubted me, never wavered, which is incredible because I don't know, she either loved me a lot or didn't know what she was talking about, but she's always thought it was going to be successful. And so I would say when you do something after your family goes to bed, it doesn't really affect them. It just affects your sleep patterns. And so you just kind of have to buck up and work harder. So it's like, well, what'd your family think about you being gone? Now, when I came to the publishing process, what they had to endure was lots of conversations, me asking questions that they didn't have answers to. And so lots of dinner time questions and conversations where they smiled and nodded and were like, yeah, yep, sure, Dad, thanks, yeah. So very gracious listeners.
Oh, man. Man, I think there are 2 really important things that you kind of dug out and fleshed out in that. One, I'm sure we'll talk about both of these when we kind of talk about F3 and your experience with F3. But one was the importance that there are people that are for you and that are in your corner, and that should be your family. And that's probably not always the case. Each family is going to be different, but I love that you can point back and have these moments of, your family's in your corner and that, we should be for each other. I think that's incredibly important. And then 2, something that you mentioned was when you sent that initial draft to your editor, and you said, why don't we go to people that would just tell us the right answer, tell us what we want to hear, and yeah, that's great. But that's not going to help us grow. That's not going to help us progress. That's not going to help us develop it into kind of who we're called to be. And I thought that was really good, that when you got that 20-page cover letter of like, hey, maybe this is not what I want to hear, but it's what I need to hear. Right. I thought that was really cool that you said that. And that's part of the process too. Right.
Absolutely. There was a book I read called Thanks for the Feedback. And it's got like these pencil sketches on the front cover. And it was life-changing because we don't want to hear feedback. I mean, personally, spiritually, professionally, But if you weren't getting feedback, like, how would you get better? And so iron sharpens iron, right? This is F3. This is our motto, right? Iron sharpening iron. Like, how would we get better? And so if, I leave my first workout and I do a cue and I'm not doing something well, if someone didn't tell me, hey, just by the way, consistency is key. Or, hey, by the way, keep it simple. Oh, man. Well, thank you. Thanks for the feedback. And so thanks for the feedback really changed the way I think. And then I had a boss at TVA, Dwayne Lanier, who was a feedback king. And over the course of 4 years, I went from hating it to loving it. And so the feedback, I just don't know how people get better and improve spiritually, professionally, personally, without getting feedback. And there's a right and a wrong way to do it. Okay. So I don't mean we have to be jerks to each other at F3 or in our churches or in our jobs. Sure. There's a right and a wrong way to do it, but that's good. And then, it's, having people that are for you. My brothers, I have 4 brothers, Reed, Reagan, Riley, and Reese, and their wives, Sophia, Katie, and Natalie. They have been just incredibly gracious and supportive, and then my parents, and then my in-laws. They're all in the acknowledgments, and they're not just trite words. They're not just throwaway statements. Like my parents and my in-laws and my brothers and their wives, like they truly are fans. And man, you need that energy. And you may not be writing a book. You may be starting a business, or you may be starting a ministry, or you could be redesigning your home. You need people that support you and that give you that taste. Man, I can really do this. Because so many times, we just we beat ourselves up.
Gosh, I mean, would it be fair to say that maybe the harshest editor that you come in contact with in your writing has been yourself? Or maybe the most honest editor, I guess.
So I've had two fantastic editors, Sue Streckers, who's my current editor. I had one named Kim Corthell in Homeland Security, and I knew she supported me. I knew when she roughed me up, it was for my own benefit. But when I read my own stuff, I used to hear actors say they watch their own shows, and I think that's kind of weird. When you want to see yourself do it, once it went into once it's in hardcover, I don't read my books. It's just very difficult, because if I read it 100 times, I would delete things 100 times. I mean, writing is deleting, and so it's painful to see your own stuff, because you're always thinking, man, I could have just turned that phrase a little better. Man, that would have been a great complex sentence right there. Man, why didn't I? Anyway, so yes, it's easy to rough yourself up.
I want you to know that I now have a full list of books I am planning to read just from our conversation. So thank you.
Good
for that as well.
Listen, I know I always caveat and tell people, hey, I know I'm constantly, recommending books. My brother Riley and I, we kind of we compete, if you will, in a good natured way on how many books we read each year. And so I love hearing about new books. I like giving new books. And so, I have a book list that I just recommend. And in fact, I could send it to you if you want. I just have a list of those books. It's like, man, people have told me about them. And I can't imagine if I didn't read, thanks to the feedback, if I didn't read Willpower Doesn't Work, if I didn't read Mindset, if I didn't read Jack Carr's fiction novels, if I didn't read Vince Flynn's novel, it's like I'd be a different person if I didn't read those.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, you think about, and one other thing I want to go back and revisit, that you have journals from 20 years. One, that's really cool that you keep a record of that. And I say that because I was looking back at a journal of mine from 3 years ago, and even kind of coming out of college and doing the fellows and that transition process, and thinking about and looking back about what you wrote then and kind of where you were then. And I was sitting back and reading this journal from 3 years ago, thinking about, like, man, I was in this place 3 years ago, and look how faithful the Lord has been. And it's just really cool to see where you were and kind of what your thoughts were from years past. And I'm sure you've done that too. And especially from that first journal that you wrote, kind of going into DC, I'm sure that's kind of been a life-giving reflection, kind of looking back as well.
I can't imagine I can't imagine not journaling. Like I can't imagine not having a manuscript documentation
Right.
of my life and my thoughts. And I don't mean from an egotistical thing. I mean, it's so important. And by the way, it's not like I've done it every day for 20 years or every year.
Sure.
I have
Sure.
year gaps. I
Hmm.
mean, I've had plenty of gaps, but it's just like off and on for 20 years. And so, and I think everybody should
Hmm.
do it their own way. Like I think a lot of people think journaling is like, dear diary, I'm so
Yeah.
sad. And so I mean,
Yeah.
it could
That's
be
true.
that, right? No, it could be. I mean, but it's also like, what do you
Mm.
want to capture? Like, what do you want to look up on December 31st or whenever you do this of 2020 and go, these are things I need to look at. So I capture data,
Mm.
I capture information. I have stuff about some of my kids' medicines. I have, listen, I go back and read stuff. I would say I reference my journals
Mm.
often
Yeah.
because I need to see things. And so it's like, I hate, I hate, I hate telling stories based on gut feels. And so I like to go back and go, no, I did this 3 years ago. I know it feels like
Mm.
10, but it was 3. And so, yeah. And like, what do you want to see? And so whether that's Dear Diary type of stuff or whether they're prayer requests or whether it's
Mhm.
scripture or whether it's professional
Yeah.
goals. I mean, it could be anything, workout stuff. It just, whatever,
Yeah.
meets your fancy, capturing that and being able to go back and look at it. I just can't imagine not having
Oh,
that
yeah.
document. I really
Gosh. I
can't.
mean, I have done exactly what you just said. I've written professional goals in my journals. I mean, even dating back all the way to college. Written prayer requests.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I've written. I mean, I've screamed on pages. In my journals and written.
Yeah. And isn't it great when you go back and you see, man, 8 years ago, I was terrified about this
Yes.
sickness or illness, or I had a tumor
Yes.
cut out in 2006. And, I've had different things in my life. And, the Lord was gracious to me and
Hmm.
I made it. I'm fine. Right. Like, so it's like, it's nice to go back and see not only answered prayers, but also like mindsets. And yeah, it's very life-giving to go, oh man, I remember
Mm.
when my car was dead, and I thought
Yeah.
I would, and it's like, oh, okay, well, we
You're
figured it
right.
out. We made
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Oh man. Well, hey, I am going through your book here, and before we move on to the F3, what I'd like to do is, if you don't mind, I'll read one of my favorite things I have read so far in your book, and then
Okay, hit me.
if you have maybe a favorite chapter or something that has really stuck out at you that you wrote from your book, if you want to share, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear that from you too. But so even just starting The Missionary, love it, big fan, and I'm glad I got this when I did. One thing that I've read so far that kind of just really stuck out at me was on page 5, and about halfway down, it goes something like this. What happens next? He blurted, to no one in particular. Randy said, we wait, we listen, we don't say a word. And as I was reading that, I really enjoyed reading that, because that took me back to a place of remembering of, we are very much active in this book. At least I see myself active in this book, and can relate to my life for the past year has been what happens next, blurting to no one in particular. And then I think we get these people, these wise people that God sends in our life that just says, hey, we're going to wait, we're going to listen, and we don't say a word. And to me, what I got out of that, and the reason that was so formational for me was we are in this process of kind of what happens next, whether you're thinking about the coronavirus or the election or whatever it may be, whatever sphere of influence in life you find yourself in. We're all going to find ourselves in a place where we are going to say, what happens next? Maybe to our wife, maybe to our kids, our coworkers, maybe to no one in particular. And I think we wait, we listen, we don't say a word, struck a chord in me specifically, because we all have a Randy in our lives, right? That's going to encourage us and say, We wait, the Lord's going to be good. We listen, the Lord's going to be good. We don't say a word because he's going to give us words to say. And I just pulled that out of there, and that's been one of my favorite things I've read, which I know is just a very small part of this book so far. But I just wanted to thank you for that, just getting into this book initially. So,
thank you. Well, listen, I mean, so what I love about fiction is a couple things. It helps us escape reality. Okay. And so first of all, scientifically, it uses a different part of your brain than nonfiction, just for the record. So that's why you should have a balance of fiction and nonfiction. So the fiction uses the creative side of your brain. And so it helps us escape reality, number one. Number two, it's a different thing for everyone. And so I love when I've had people call and say, and they'll describe a character and they'll go, is this what she looks like? And I always say the same thing. I can't answer that question for you. I know what she looks like to me, but I can't fill that in for you because that would totally ruin it for you. And so I've had people say, hey, is this what you meant in this section? I'm like, well, it doesn't matter what I meant for that section, right? Like the matters is how you enjoyed it. And so what I love is hearing different people's takes, and that's all formed by our worldviews, which is cool. So one section, so thank you for sharing that. I mean, again, I didn't expect you to say that section, so it's really cool. One section, there's a number of things that I enjoyed about the book.
Yeah,
I
no
don't want to blow
spoilers.
anything, but I would say one motif, if you will, that was fun to tease out was Randy's relationship with Nassim. Okay. And I won't say anything too much because I don't want to give anything away, but Nassim's one of the terrorists who keeps him hostage. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. And so he and Nassim are having this moment, and Nassim basically asks him if Randy will teach him English. And he says, of course, it's on 134. Of course, I'll teach you English. Nassim grinned and put his scarred hand over his heart and said, "Thank you, sir." And Randy was like, "Sir, you just call me sir. I didn't expect that level of respect." And so he begins to form this relationship with one of his captors. And it's not really Stockholm syndrome, right? The Stockholm syndrome was like, hey, you get taken captive. After a while, you connect with them, which is how you get people that taken hostage, and then they defend them. It's not really that. It's really this, we have pictures painted in our mind of what the others are like. We have these others in our lives. And so it could be Democrats and Republicans. It could be Trump, Biden voters. It could be liberals or conservatives. And we have these others in our lives, and we have them demonized as what we think they are. And so there's this multifaceted relationship he has with his captors. It doesn't make them less bad people, and it doesn't make them not terrorists, right? They are, and they are bad people. But it shows them in these four-dimensional aspects to where they all have human sides, and this captor Nassim wanted to learn English and thanked him for that, and there's this little connection of humanity. And so he forms some human connections with his captors, and I won't say any more than that. And it's not because they're great people and he's a bad. It's not one dimensional. It's like everybody has a sliver of humanity in them. And so right now, as we're coming off of this really divisive election, the people that you think are quote unquote the craziest, the worst, I mean, insert your adjective, they're probably sitting at home eating dinner, really nervous about the country.
Yeah.
In their own aspect. And so, this book, and I'm just going to throw out some teasers. There's civil unrest. There are elections that are tricky. There's a Hispanic female who's a CIA officer. There's an African-American female who's an intelligence operative. And people go, oh, so you're trying to be inclusive because we're in 2020. I'm like, no, I wrote this 18 months ago. They're in there because they're fantastic characters, and it's what America and my experiences look like. So while Knoxville's a little bit more homogenous, I mean, my friends in DC were Black and Indian and Christian and Jewish and like all these all these people groups, right? And so I hope it reflects life. And there's inclusivity as a tagline, which is insulting to me. And then there's humanity in inclusivity. And so I think you'll see in the national security thriller world, there are very few minority operatives. It's just not the way it works. Most national security thrillers are written by white males, and they're have white male leads. And so I decided that if anybody was going to shake things up, why not be me? And so I hope you'll find these characters that are experiencing someone's humanity that they didn't expect to. So that's kind of one of my favorite parts of the book.
Oh, that's good.
It's kind of meta-narrative.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too. I'm excited to read too. Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
And I think that's probably a really good segue into F3, because the first thing I thought of when you were just speaking about that if you've read the Q source, or for our F3 guys that are listening, if you have a copy of the Q source, if not, I'll get you one. It talks about leadership is disruptive. And so the question you asked is like, hey, why not me? Right. I mean, come on. Someone has to do it. So the Q source talks about leadership being disruptive, and that could be disruptive in so many different forms, but disruptive for the betterment and growth and development of not only you as the author, but for people around you as well. So I really like that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Which brings us to F3, man, as the as the founder of Area 51, and not only the Asylum AM, but the Asylum PM. I mean, that's two ways. Tell us about F3 and Crawdad, and just maybe a little bit of the history of Area 51. Big fan. So, yeah.
Come on. I love it. Yeah. So 5 years ago, a little bit more than 5 years ago, Ted Anslett, AKA Captain Crunch, began to reach out and contact some guys and say, hey, I'm starting this workout group. Okay. And frankly, I wasn't interested. I felt like I was in pretty good shape. I did 5Ks and half marathons and sprint triathlons, and I just felt like I was in pretty good shape. And so day one, I didn't go, and I kind of felt guilty.
This is the launch,
talking
right?
Up a lot, and so
okay.
This is the launch, and so I think my first day was in week 2 or 3, and of course it's at 5:30 in the morning. So finally, I told my wife, I was like, "Hey, I gotta go. I gotta like punch this ticket and like show Ted that I went." So I go, and I was just annoyed by it. There's guys running around high-fiving, calling each other nicknames. And I just found it like repulsive. And so I go home and oh, by the way, I thought I was going to puke the whole time. And so I go home and Caitlin says, hey, what'd you think? And I was like, I mean, I didn't like it. I'm not going to go back, but side note, I thought, I was dry heaving the whole time. And so I have to make sure if I'm going to quit that I can actually do it before I don't go back. So it's not a position of weakness, right?
Right.
Just the ultimate male pride. And so I said, well, I'll go a couple weeks and kind of kick this thing in the rear end and then just tell Ted, hey, this isn't for me, right? So I go and I get named Crawdad. I'm from Louisiana, I'm a Louisiana boy, so I guess they named me Crawdad. And so in the first 2 weeks, I'll never forget, one night I go to bed and it's monsooning. And I mean torrential downpour. So I wake up and I hear the rain and I'm so relieved. Like, oh, it's going to be canceled. This is great news. And I can hear my phone buzzing and vibrating on my dresser. And I look at it and guys are out there going, let's go. And they're out in the rain.
Oh, man.
You have to be kidding me. So I put my shoes on, I go, I show up. We're laying, I'll never forget the waves of cold water,
of course,
running up your backside, and just thinking, this is freaking miserable. And whoever was on cue was like, come on, you only get wet once, lay down. And it's just like, these guys are nuts. And sometime in that first 2 weeks, I began to form a brotherhood with these guys to where then I was going to see them, not to work out. And then my first Saturday, Mr. Bean was there. he was one of the kind of the originators. It was he was from North Carolina, and they would come over on the weekends during our trial period, during the 6-week trial period. And I'll never forget, I showed up on my first Saturday, and I think he's a British guy, and he goes, "Hey, does nobody have Twitter?" And because he had tweeted out, "Hey, let's meet for dinner or drinks or something," and nobody goes. He goes, "Well, let's start off. Let's warm up 100 burpees." And we did 100 burpees to work out. And I was like, this guy is nuts. And so I wanted to fight the guy, And then by the end of it, though, I finished my first Saturday, and I was never the same person. And anybody, I've sold some people for years on F3, and they're like, "No, it's not my thing." I'm like, "I know, wasn't mine either." But what happens is you form relationships with these guys, and the whole concept of a sad clown, right? The American male, typically, somebody says, "Hey, how are you doing?" "I'm great. I'm fine. Thank you." When in reality, you could be dying inside. You could be sad. You could have just lost your job. Your wife could have passed away, all these things. And so you form relationships with these guys, and then you do your first Q. And I think my first one was on a Saturday.
Of course.
I didn't sleep the night before. And then you do it, and you're having a blast. And, you see your first guy splashing Merlot over on the side, which is obviously F3 talk for puking. And you're like,
this was a good
heck
cue.
yeah. Okay. I figured something out. And, 50, 100 Qs later, you can't wait to do it. And so when I sell people, I'm constantly telling them, I didn't like it either. I know it's ridiculous. And I know you're going to love these guys. And so the sweetest part is when you convert someone who is a hater, and then you look up one day and they're queuing and they're yelling and screaming and saying all the, and it's like, we did it. So the consistency, I'm a man of routine. And so I love that we get there every day. We go through the routine. We do our workout. We have the time at the end, the bomb, and where everybody stands around and you hear an inspirational word. I love that it's faith-based, but it's not faith exclusive. And so while I'm an evangelical Christian, and go to Presbyterian Church, that's not like that's a litmus test. And so it's fantastic to see guys interacting. I think we've had a really motley crew of people. I think we've had Muslim guys, Jewish guys, atheist guys. We've had just a kind of a hodgepodge of humanity there. And I love that. And the friends that I've gotten to meet, including yourself, I'll just never be the same for. And so I constantly tell Captain Crunch, who is referenced in the book, and you'll see him in the acknowledgments, I felt like an obligation in a good way. I had to mention him because he took the baton and started it here in Knoxville. And now
13, 14,
AOs, is that right?
And some expansions,
and so 13 or 14. That's right. And hundreds of guys active. And you see these guys, and it's like, man, all these lives are changed in different ways. And that could be, when you hear a person give his testimony about, man, I lost 100 pounds, I was dying, and you look at him, you go, gosh, you're stout. Or you hear a person saying, hey, I was lonely, I was miserable, I was in depression, I was on medication. You go, man, this is real stuff. And so, as I looked at the book, I felt like one of my characters had to be an F3 guy. I just felt like it just had too much of an impact on my life. I've had too much fun. I've laughed too hard at F3. I've almost passed out. I just have so many memories at F3. I just felt like one of the characters had to be an F3 guy. And so you'll get to it in the story. It's told from the perspective of his wife, who is a progressive person, not faith-based, progressive person. And so her experience of having a husband who was an F3 guy, who she hated the faith aspect of it, but she couldn't argue with what a different person he was. And it just shook her to the core. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. So I just felt like F3 had to be in the book. And so it is. It's a ton of fun. And so obviously Ted, Captain Crunch had to be in there. There's 100 different guys that I would love to have represented. So yeah, it's just been a blast. And I can't say enough things about it. I think that's why so many guys sell it and proselytize it, because they believe in it. It's one thing if you're selling a product or if you're paid to sell something, but when you believe in it, you just have to talk about it. And so people are like, man, it sounds like a cult. I'm like, well, it's not, but I understand that we do talk in terms and we do have nicknames and we do say stupid things and we do get happy about stupid stuff. So so then there's the naming, right? The different AOs. So we go to the one, or I go to the one called the Asylum, which is Lakeshore Park in Knoxville. And so for me, it's been a thrill to name somewhere, right? And so the different places you get to name. So Grinch's Hill, Area 51, Field of Dreams. Those are places I got to name, and it's like they live on, right? They live on in history. So when you do somebody else's queue and they're like, okay, we're headed to Grinch's Hill, you're like, yeah, I named that on Christmas Eve in 2016, So Area 51 is a personal favorite because I love running hills. And so that's just a grueling, almost straight up hill. And, but it's fantastic because it's got that concrete place at the bottom. So you can, as far as a workout's concerned, you can go down there, you can hit your Merkins, your push-ups, you can hit your crunches, you can hit your burpees, and then you attack this huge hill. And I would say it has reasonable topography in the sense of there are holes. You probably could snap your kneecap, but I don't think we've had anybody do it yet. And so we've kind of learned where the holes are. And then you get to the top, and there's this last big push up that hill onto the asphalt. And so you get to the top, and you have more areas you can do workouts. So what a great place to spend your Saturday morning, breathing your guts out, running up a big hill. And then you get to the top hill to the best sunrise in America, where you overlook the lake, Fort Loudon Lake, and the mountains. And you think, man, I can't believe I get to work out here on Saturday. So I'm a junkie. I know there's other great AOs all across the country, but man, I challenge them to put theirs up against any day of the week.
I think we do pretty well. I think the Asylum Asylum in general, PMA, is without a doubt one of the best AOs. You got everything you need. You got playgrounds, you got streets, you got hills. Let's not forget Cardiac and Everest.
That's right.
Gosh. And now you have that nice Coliseum.
Oh.
Good parking as well.
And good parking.
Yeah, parking is very key. And the cafeteria is less than 5 minutes away on Saturday mornings. So one thing you touched, the reward as the reward. Called, yes. You definitely have to earn your reward. However, I have been known, I think a total of 2 times, to show up at the cafeteria without doing F3. And I completely blame it on my alarm. And
as have I.
So,
totally.
Yeah, man, that is really cool. Love the name Crawdad, and also the first F. So that fitness, it's the magnet for a reason. That's not why F3 exists, but that's what sticks, right? And then the fellowship, as it's called in the Q source, and the Free to Lead book by Greg OBT is the glue. So that's what gets people coming back, right? Just like you said, that fellowship. Maybe workouts are not your thing exactly, or at least maybe they're not your thing initially. But then you start to realize, hey, I'm not just coming out here to do some Merkins, or I'm not coming out here to do 2 miles in 45 minutes or something, or I'm not coming out here to do, burpees as a warm up, which, let's just disclaimer, burpees, very hit or miss, is not a warm up. I'm just, let's call it what it is. Not a warm up.
It's not a warm up. That's right. That's a Q-tip. It's not a warm up, right?
There you go.
Tempo Merkins, not burpees.
I'd also love to get your thoughts on cherry pickers.
Reach.
And the validity of a cherry picker.
Oh man! So if you ever do my cues, you'll know that there's constantly, I'm a vocal presence to the annoyance of whoever's on cue. That there are certain workouts that should be outlawed, and so cherry pickers I feel like are just designed to pop your hamstrings, and sit-ups. Once it was outlawed and taken out of the U.S. Army Field Manual, Robbie Crawdad took it out of his manual, and so yeah. And then I slipped I hurt my back about 3 years ago doing a partner carry up Baby Everest, which was ridiculous. We shouldn't have done it. We outlawed it after that. I was not very bright. Yeah. And so there's some things that hurt my back. And so, yeah, you call it the Mumblechatter. I just feel like it's my role. If someone's doing cherry pickers, I know that Lily Dipper is a huge fan of cherry pickers. I feel like it's my role to get in his head on how to do it.
Oh man. I think why I love Lily Dipper doing cherry pickers is just the sound he makes on that 40 count. there's nothing like it on a Saturday.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
And you know what? You mentioned Dread and OBT. I've never met those guys, but I'd love to one day to thank them because I think they've impacted the country. And that's not a lot of people can say that. Hey, I've done something that has impacted the country, but I think they have. And so I'd love to thank them one day because they've just done fantastic work. And it's,
you think about
me directly.
Starting in North Carolina, we just hit our 5-year here in Knoxville. And think about how much F3 is spread across the country, and not just workouts, but you think about all the husbands it's impacted, sons, fathers, brothers. I mean, these men that now have a better purpose of, hey, we are created for so much more. And being a husband and being a son and being a brother, being a father, for example, being a coworker. I mean, the impact has been tremendous. I know we have the F3 Nation 10-year coming up in January, which should be pretty good. But think for a minute about your time in F3. You know, by the time you started F3, you were a husband and a father, and have a pretty good track record professionally as well. But think about your time since being an F3. What has stood out? What has helped shape you into, the best version of Crawdad, the best version of Robbie Dickens that you are today, and maybe how that's influenced your writing professionally as well, if you want to share that.
Yeah, sure. That's great comment. So one thing when you're leading a workout, I think you have this misnomer when you first start, like, I have to be not only doing it at the front, I have to be better than everyone, faster than everyone. And then you realize quickly, this is a leadership exercise, right? Your goal as a Q is to make sure everyone else gets a good workout, not for you to get a good workout. And I think that's so transferable professionally, because I've been in leadership roles for the past decade, and it's easy to read that in a leadership book. And it's, you can even, it's rewarding when you see your staff do good things. But something about just a light turning on over the past 5 years, when you see other people flourishing and succeeding, and in this case, getting a good workout in and connecting with other men, you've done your job well. It really doesn't matter if you didn't sleep well, if you're out of shape, if you've what I like to call a well-constructed cue. You've thought that out and you've planned it. And everybody has different philosophies in the way they cue. So some people plan it out down to the specific detail. I plan constructs. So I plan 5 areas of the AO. But sometimes, depending on timing, I like to audible. But it's planned, right? So you got flexibility. But it's all the leadership of it. And so I would say enjoying other people's flourishing and doing good things just feels really good. And that's been a great lesson to learn. I would say as a family, there's nothing cooler. So I take Carter, he becomes Jumbo. And when he connects with guys, and then there are days where I'm in bed and I'm not intending to go to F3, and it's 5:15 and I hear the back door close and a car crank up, and it's your son going to F3 without you.
Oh yeah.
That's an amazing feeling. I mean, that's really when you feel like, man, this is the process working. And so, where that translates into my writing is in the area of accountability. So the hardest part of F3 is waking up and putting your shoes on, right? Like the workout, it's kind of all downhill once you get in the car. And so the idea of, and this part of willpower doesn't work as well, that book, like, how do you erase the externality? So if you've laid out your shorts, and everyday shorts weather for me, t-shirt, your gloves, your shoes, your socks, your keys, if you've laid all that out, you just took away one barrier. Okay. So the hardest part is taking the accountability to prepare. You wake up and you get dressed and you go get in the car. There have been days where I sat in the car and I'm like, what am I doing? It's 18 degrees, but I'm in the car, so I'm going to go. Right. And so the accountability of how do I tear down barriers for myself so that I'll continue to be accountable? And so for writing, it's like, hey, what are some things that are going to stand in the way? I mean, writing for a deadline is a different sensation, right? And so when I've got to grind this out, and so during the publishing process, I have to edit this 370-page manuscript, and I have 3 days to do it. I mean, there's nothing but to do it. You got to literally lay out your tennis shoes metaphorically. You got to set your alarm. You got to do your chores, and you just got to grind it out. And so I would say just the accountability aspect of how do I tear down barriers? And then at the end, it feels good. So when you get to the bomb, right, it's over. And so let's say it's 25 degrees, you're standing around, you're steam in your case, right? And you're sweating, you just grind it out a workout, and you're done. You've already accomplished something for the day. There's a euphoria that you feel that you go, man, I mean, I'm going to go hit the showers, and it doesn't matter what else I get accomplished today. I've accomplished something. And so I think the idea of, banging out your checklist. I don't know how people live without a checklist. I don't know how people just kind of willy-nilly go through life. It probably takes more discipline to do that. I just can't do it. I don't have the discipline to go through life without a checklist. And so I think that's part of leading F3 workouts. And then finally, as far as a friend and a mentor, the big part about F3, if I could communicate anything to anybody, the biggest deal is just showing up. And same way in life. If you want to be a good friend of somebody, just show up. We had a miscarriage. My wife had a miscarriage for our third child. And the people that ministered to me the most just called and said, I'm sorry. That was it. There wasn't any long, pithy sentences or great advice. And I think a lot of times, especially we as men, we want to have the right words to say, And so, your friend says, hey, my mom has cancer. You want to everything in you wants to throw a silver lining at them. Don't. Just be there. Just show up. And I think that's the beautiful part about F3. That's what I really like about writing. Like, I, have not claimed to be John Grisham or Vince Flynn, but it's like, you know what? I showed up and I did this and I'm moving forward. And, and let the chips fall where they may, and just don't be afraid of living.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
So anyway, those are my takeaways.
And I think one thing that we would both agree on pretty hardcore is for you writing, but for F3 as well, for both of us, if you get out there and Q and for your book as well, and for your writing, if you impact one person and if you change something in one person, for me, that made the entire Q worth it, right? And I'm sure you could say that for your book. I mean, obviously, it's done a lot for me so far, even just a couple chapters in. And when you Q, that's such a good point, because it's not about you. And I've heard Captain Crunch say that so much, and he's drilled it in. And when you Q, it's not about you. It's about those guys that toe the line, that have showed up at 5:30. And I think it's really cool that Carter or Jumbo is now doing F3 as well. And you see that process come full circle, right? Of we're building better fathers. We're building better men. We're building better sons. And I think that's such a neat gift for you to have with your son, right? And then for Carter to impact men in F3 and vice versa as well.
It is. And Captain is obviously one of the great leaders of our city. And so, it's not about you. It's just a great quote. It's a great quote for F3. It's a great quote for life, being a husband, father. And listen, for the females listening, it's a great quote about being a good sister, a good daughter, a good friend. I mean, these lessons are designed for men for F3, but it's transferable, right? Like being a leader in town, we have a female mayor. We don't have a female president and a female vice president, and we'll probably have a female president. Like, these are just great transferable leadership skills, right? It's not about you. It's about other people flourishing. It's, showing up, not being afraid of, being a lot less risk averse. And so they're just great lessons for men and women, boys and girls. We obviously get to do F3 with men. It's a men peer-led group for men. But it's just great leadership lessons. And hopefully we can continue to impact society. And I'm really fortunate.
Yes,
I've got to do
absolutely.
This, for 5 years.
yes, hopefully,
And hopefully many more.
I'm excited for our tenure already. We've done so much much work in our first 5. It makes me really excited to see what we're going to do and how the Lord is going to use F3 and Knoxville for the next 5. And one last thing that I want to hit on before we do a little Namorama here is something that you said it as well, which I thought was just incredibly foundational as well. That people just showed up. So when you were sharing about the miscarriage with you and your wife, and really how you all have grown through that, and really who showed up. Once again, F3 is a free men's boot camp style workout. That is what men come to, but really F3 is a leadership organization, right? But just like you mentioned, we need men and women to do this thing in life well, with leadership as well. So there's something about showing up, something about a high impact man or a high impact woman, something about their presence that makes the room better, and something about just showing up. We need women that are going to show up and going to live authentically, live with character, just like we need men to show up that are going to live authentically, live with character. And it's such a unique way that we get to do that within F3, but also get to encourage our sisters to do that as well, right? And then encourage our guys that we see in F3 to do that in whatever sphere of influence they find. So I thought that was really good that you called that out, because, yeah.
Yes. Thank you. And I want to give a shout out to FIA, because, they're really changing the town as well. And, when we run by there on Saturday mornings, and they're out grinding it out, right? They're out in the gloom, just grinding it out. I have so much respect and admiration for them, because, again, they're showing up, they're trying to get better. They need support systems in place. They need, if they're wives and mothers, they need husbands that can make it possible for them to be there on time if they have small children. If they're single, they need people that are propping them up in life. And so, FIA is really doing the same thing, and it's just inspirational. And so I'm just grateful that, you and I have both gotten to experience that. It is a peer-led community leadership organization. And if you attend and you miss that point, you've missed the point. And so I just encourage anybody that's listening, if you're out there and you haven't gotten to lead yet in Q, lean into it, step into it. It's fun, and you're gonna have a lot of people supporting you, and you're gonna feel the sheer pleasure of seeing other people succeed. And then on a side note, there's nothing better when someone posts on the Slack later in the day, "Hey, I had to go home and take ibuprofen and take a protein shake because I was hurting so bad." You're like, "Oh yeah." So it's a leadership organization, and so we've been fortunate through Dredd at the top at the Head Shed, North Carolina, all the way down through Captain Crunch here in Knoxville, and through Abscess for his time, and now moving into Judge Judy for these guys who are taking leadership roles. So we're fortunate to have benefited from their leadership. And so I'm just happy to talk about, the missionary and the other virus and my F3 experiences. Just can't thank you enough for having me on. I love long form content. I love podcasts. There's just nothing cooler than just sitting around and just talking shop, talking about life. And so, I'd love to, if anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, I'm at Robertson Dickens. And then on Facebook, it's at Robbie Dickens. And then Twitter is Dickens02. I'd love to have you follow me on the socials.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, man, so much for taking time out of your day to do this. I'm thrilled that we got to have this conversation and talk about life as well. And if you have not already gotten your copy of The Missionary, it is on Amazon. I will include that link in this episode. Definitely do not want to miss out on this incredible book by Robbie Dickens. So man, thank you so much for being so open. I've loved getting to know you better through this conversation, from an F3 perspective, but also just from a personal and professional perspective as well. So as we always do with the F3Knoxville podcast, we will end in a classic Namorama where we simply go around and say our hospital name, our age, and our F3 name. So my brother, go ahead.
I am Robbie Dickens.
Crawdad, my friend.
Years old,
and yours truly is Dan Henson. I am 26 years old, and Steam is my F3 name. So, brother, thank you.
Steam. Steam, listeners, thank you for having us.
Yes,
and,
sir.
having
Until
me,
then.
and I look forward to seeing you out in the
Okay, thanks for listening to that interview back from 2020 that Steam did with Crawdad. That was the interview that I listened to the first time of an F3Knoxville podcast and really got me wanting to do this project. I think by then Steam had already run out of steam with the podcast, so that was one that got me thinking about what I could do from it here on out. So I hope you enjoyed that. I will be back next week with Beyond the COT on Monday, picking up the 6 on Wednesday, and Mumblechatter on Friday. Hopefully I will have everything figured out in terms of a new intro, a better music, and a couple special drops here and there in the new way of me doing these podcasts. So once again, thank you for indulging me in this. I really have been enjoying doing this and learning more about not only podcasting, but getting to know some of these F3 HIMs that are around town. As always, this is Davis Bodie, 34 Blindside. Thank you for listening to this F3Knoxville podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review in your favorite podcast app to help us grow the show. And share this with any sad clown in your life that might need a little F3 to get them going.